Hello orchid friends, how are you? Welcome back to my channel. If this is your first time watching my video, my channel is all about orchids. From what orchids I have, how I grow them, my thoughts on certain orchid topics, to what orchids in my collection are blooming, etc. So if you want to follow along my orchid hobby adventure, please consider subscribing to my channel and turn on the notification. Today we have an orchid identification video and I'm very happy to share this with you. If you have followed my orchid channel for a while, you know that I have a type of orchid. I actually have 6 of them, and I usually refer them as a no ID yellow fragrant Phalaenopsis orchid from my local grocery store. And they're actually not no IDs anymore. Their names are actually Golden Pixie. I was even able to confirm the ID with this particular nursery that registered this particular cross for its name, Younghome Golden Pixie. When I was living in New York, I had purchased the first 2 that I have, and earlier this year in January, the first two that I have, they rebloomed, and the first 2, they are more polaric, as you can see in the photo here. And then come in March, I was able to purchase 2 additional ones. So the second batch, I also got 2 of them, and they were also the same price for $8.99 at my local grocery store. They were just as fragrant as I remembered. It's really rare to come across fragrant orchids in large distribution channel like grocery stores. And for the price of less than $10, you get fragrant Phals. It's really, really good. And then September, I was able to come across 2 more orchids, and then I purchased them with a discount because their pots were cracked. And I normally don't really care so much about orchid names or IDs. If they're no IDs, they're no IDs. I don't really care as much. But the biggest benefit is if you know their names, it's possible for you to be able to research their parentage to better understand how they do in certain environment based on their parentage. For example, based on the parentage, you can understand whether a given orchid is a warm grower or cold grower, so you can adjust the care that you give to your orchid accordingly. The orchid you see has been in my office since I purchased it in September, and by end of December, when we break for the holiday, it was still going very strong with one last flower, and it was still fragrant. So this orchid is just so hardy. It's very long lasting. But just to give you more comparison reference between the first batch and the second batch that I bought, I'm going to include an old video clip for you to take a closer look at how these 2 batches of orchids differ from one another. It was never my plan to make this video with the footage and pictures that you're going to see in this video, but I rediscovered these materials while I was trying to find some older footages on the other orchid. But then I realized that these 4 orchids that I cherish dearly, they're all fragrant, yellow, and they're no IDs from Trader Joe's, and I've talked about them in different videos, but I've never actually put them side by side, and they're purchased from different years. The first 2 in the front that you see are from this year, and then the 2 in the back are reblooming for this year, but then I purchased them early last year in 2017, and they all they're in a slightly different form. If you look at the flowers, I think these 2 that you're looking at from the year before, from last year, they're more polaric. And then the 2 that I purchased this year, the flower shape are more rounded, but both kinds are super fragrant, and they lasted for a long time. I think from the beginning of the bloom until the last flower dropped, I think each one of them at least was in bloom for at least 3 months. So I think this is quite amazing. But the story behind the 2 that I purchased this year, I think I might have talked about it in their feature video. I just went to Trader Joe's for some groceries, but then I discovered that these two, they were the only two Fragrant Orchid left. I don't know how many they had, but when I went there on, I believe, a Monday after my gym session, I saw these two, and then I quickly put them in my basket before I even examined them. And then once they were in my basket, I felt better, so I started to examine their roots and their leaves, and I realized that they were in pretty good shape. I suspected that people didn't buy them because they were looking for other orchids with bigger blooms or more bloom counts, and then these two just kind of got left alone. But people didn't realize that they were fragrant. I mean, for me, paying for the same price and to have a fragrant orchid is a huge bonus. As you know, many grocery store Phalaenopsis orchids are not fragrant. So the fact that you can pay the same price, less than $10 per orchid, and have a fragrant orchid, I think that's a great find. And then the other two orchid from last year, it was kind of similar story. I just, got two. And if you ever come across any good orchids and the price is something you can afford, always get two, just in case. Currently, they're all planted in the original bark media that they came with. And the reason I did not repot the two that I purchased from 2017 was because they were still in bloom. And based on my observation of the bark, I think it would easily, it could easily go for another year without me having to repot them. So my advice, my personal opinion is that whenever possible, you want to not disturb your orchid, and so you only repot them when the season is right, unless it's emergency repot. For example, if the roots are completely rotting, then you want to do an emergency repot. Otherwise, always wait until they're out of bloom, out of spike, and in the right season. And when it's the right season to do the repotting. Otherwise, you could seriously set back your orchids. And so for the next segment of the video is basically a comparison, because here, this is the last bloom of one of the two orchids I bought this year, and this is the older bloom of the same orchid, and you see the difference between the two. This is the last bloom, and the spots are quite obvious throughout the entire petals and sepals. But if you look at the older blooms, the spots are not as visible. So further down this video clip, you'll see the difference, the contrast. And I don't know if this is a good example of their genes not being stable, genetically not stable, so that the flowers pattern would change slightly. But here, to me, this is very obvious. It's not even a slight change. So I wonder if you have any experience with your orchids pattern being different on the same orchid. I suspect that it has to do with nutrients, maybe light, that will cause the flower to turn out differently. But overall, though, I still love these orchids dearly because they were cheap and they're fragrant, and their blooms lasted for a long time, 3 months. So you can't beat that. Also, even though there are no ID Phalaenopsis orchids, I suspect that they all have very similar parentage because they're all yellow, their leaves are all exhibiting the same type of shape, and the flowers' fragrance are very, very similar, almost identical. So I just suspect that the two from last year are more caloric, and this year is more of the regular flower shape. For the next segment, it's a footage and photo combination of the two orchids from last year. So they rebloomed this year, and because they all developed their buds and spikes and buds at different time, not at the same time. So I was lucky enough to observe the fading of the flower in almost like a phase stages. So you would see some really light yellow. When you put them together, you see very light yellow, medium yellow, and dark yellow. all at the same time, side by side. So I thought that was quite cool. These two are from last year, like I said, and the care that I have provided to all 4 orchid is watering with, I will fertilize them with quarter strength fertilizer every other watering, and then every time I give them water, I always soak them. The water level is up until about 80% of the inner cup, which is the container that they're in, but then the outer cup is a 16-ounce plastic cup, and I kind of use that as the saucer for me to soak these orchids in solution or in fertilizer in water. But once I drain these orchids completely, I put them back into this 16-ounce cup. And I noticed that the orchids really like it. I think it's because that way the water evaporation can only go up, and so some of the aerial roots at the bottom of the plant, or at the base of the plant above the media, can benefit from the moisture. So that has worked really well. But I think next spring would definitely be a good time to repot these 2 orchids, because some of the roots are actually just outgrowing the pot, and I think that the bark, you know, in a year, I think it would be a good time to replace the bark. Overall, I'm really happy with these orchids. I hope that you would have a chance to get these orchids at your local Trader Joe's, because they're great finds, very inexpensive and rewarding plants, especially with their fragrance. And if they rebloom for you, you know, that means you have done something right. And look at these roots. It's just awesome root porn for me to enjoy every single day. This is all I have for you today. If you like this video, please give it a thumbs up. And if you would like to get more orchid related videos from my channel, please subscribe and turn on the notification. I want to wish you happy growing, and I will talk to you in my next video. Ciao!